Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Student Artist Talks today. I'm Gisela Carbonell, curator at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins College, and I am so excited to present this event and welcome
Good
you all to
afternoon,
this
everyone.
Artist Talk.
Welcome to our
Today, we will be hearing from the students who have work in the exhibition Ethos, which is on view at the Cornell Fine Arts Museum until May 9th. We're going to hear from Andrea Czafit, Melissa Rodriguez, and Renee Sang. Here with me is Professor Don Rowe, Professor of Studio Art at Rollins College, and I'm going to pass it on to you, Don, for the presentations. Thank you so much.
Sorry, everyone. I was having a little bit of a technical issue with some feedback, but hello, and thank you all for joining us, and happy Fox Day to those of you who celebrate Fox Day. No, that's a fun day on our campus here, and the students are fantastic and troopers for continuing onward with all of the events associated with the exhibition that they've put on. And so today we're going to hear from those students. I myself am Professor Dawn Rowe, and I'm currently the chair of the co-chair right now, actually, of the Department of Art and Art History. And I had the pleasure of teaching these three students we'll hear from today, Renee Sang, Andrea Czafit, and Melissa Rodriguez. So I was teaching them in the second section of our year-long capstone course. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge Professor Donna Hargrove, who got them started off in the first section of the course in the fall semester. And of course, always needing to thank the rest of our colleagues in the Department of Art and Art History, and huge thanks to the Cornell Fine Arts Museum staff for their invaluable help putting this exhibition together and working with the students all year long. So we're all very grateful. So the work that the students will be sharing with you today resulted from a pretty intensive year-long process. As mentioned, our capstone goes the full year, and they really start putting this work together when they do their junior year portfolio review, which occurred just about this time last year, where they kind of articulated kind of a framework for the set of ideas that they'd be engaging with throughout the year. And so they've really worked persistently throughout these past 2 semesters to establish what we really feel is a professional level practice, and involving just countless hours in the studios and developing and refining works, and really informed by pretty extensive research and lots of trial and error. So normally we would invite the audience to sit in front of the works in the museum and hear the students talk about their work in person, but we're in a unique situation currently. So what we're doing today is we're going to screen some pre-recorded talks that the students gave, and then after each little video segment from each student where they talk about their work and show some installation views, we'll have time for questions for each student. So we'll have a video and then some questions, another video and questions, and we have 3 students today. So with that, we'll go ahead and we'll start by screening Renee Sang's art talk. So thanks, everyone.
My name is Renee. I am a senior at Rollins College. Thank you to all of the Rollins faculty and staff and other visitors for being present today to listen to me speak about the artwork that I have produced and been working on over the course of a year. I also wanted to give a big thank you to the art department at Rollins and the Cornell Fine Arts Museum for your continued support and encouragement during this process. Today, you'll all be seeing the artwork that I have created over the course of a year as part of my senior capstone in the studio art major. The senior exhibition is up now for public view through May 9th, so be sure to check it out if you haven't already. And my work consists of photography with a text component that draws from quotes I got through interviews with community members, which I drew the subject of my artwork from. As you can see in these exhibition views, these are just some of the photographs that I have produced from this process, and I'll be showing more close-up detailed views of the artwork as well as images and a few videos from the process. Overall, though, I will be giving you a more in-depth understanding of my artworks and my process throughout the creative journey of my project. The primary medium I work with is photography. I have always been fascinated with photography and art in general at a young age, but I had never really learned to use it in kind of a more contemporary art setting before. I have also always been interested in media as a whole, and I'm currently majoring in critical media and cultural studies at Rollins as well as studio art. And I've been able to use elements of both majors in my project. But more specifically, I have invested in documentary work during my time at Rollins and realized that I wanted to produce content and artwork that used these types of documentary methods of relationship forming, collaborative, kind of embedded in the community of the subject types of methods to create a more meaningful work, which brings me to the subject of my artwork. Over the past year, I have been working on a photography project on Split Oak Forest, which is a locally protected conservation land. And my interest with the topic first started when I saw the local issue on Split Oak Forest and the expressway project on the Orange County Elections website over the summer. And it first caught my attention because of the type of precedent it would set for just, protected land everywhere. To kind of provide some background, Split Oak Forest is part of an original agreement as a mitigation land provided to the county in an exchange from another past development project that would destroy a lot of natural habitats and environments. So, as part of a conservation easement and ordinance to mitigate those damages, Split Oak was promised as this new conservation land and was already supposed to be protected forever. So, the Central Florida Expressway Authority wanted to build a 6 to 8 lane expressway through the middle of the forest that they also didn't publicly reveal, but was designated for leading to even more development that would be built somewhere else. So, it was essentially a development enabling road, and they received a lot of backlash from the local community. Eventually, community members were able to get this issue onto the Orange County 2020 ballot as a charter amendment. My work started out covering the beauty of this forest and kind of the political climate surrounding its potential destruction using documentary methods, but turned into something larger too. I wanted to advocate on behalf of Split Oak and all of its beauty and biodiversity, of course, but I also hoped to generate conversations about the destruction of our natural world, as thoughtless, uncontrolled development seems to be just allowed to impede everything in its wake. As I've kind of come to see from development projects like this, it's usually about building first and dealing with the consequences later without even much careful or methodical urban planning or consideration of those impacted. And all of the people I spoke with throughout this project weren't anti development, which might be the usual assumption. They were just advocating for a more thoughtful and considerate approach to the decision making process, especially when it comes to these types of new development projects. Split oak has a lot of value, not just in terms of its ecological value, but its recreational value to the surrounding community too. I think we should have this human connection to the natural world. Even if it might be land that we haven't physically been on, we should care about its plight and its continued path towards destruction. In addition, I really wanted to highlight a beauty of another type, which was that coming from the community members I witnessed who advocated so tirelessly on behalf of Split Oak Forest and just for keeping their local governments accountable to the promises that were made. Thanks to their efforts, Split Oak was able to win its amendment on the ballot with 86.4% in support of saving it. And I've had the pleasure of taking tours and walking through Split Oak with some of the community members who were involved in the fight to save it. The photos in this exhibit are also one component of a larger project that I'm working on Split Oak, as I've also been in the process of actually making a documentary film on the subject and about the kind of local activism that played such a significant role in saving it. So I have been able to further interview and get to know those involved in the issue to further inform my process. One member even joked with me that this was a type of symbiotic relationship where, they got a walking buddy to hike through Split Oak with, while I was also getting to take new photos and see parts of Split Oak that I had never found on my own before. It was a very unique experience to see Split Oak through their eyes, and it just really taught me a lot, not only about the forest itself, but about its value to the local community and just their tenacity in preserving this beautiful space. I've also really been trying to kind of hone in on what it means to be using documentary methods in this project. To me, it means creating a body of work that builds relationships and converses with community members and ultimately works collaboratively with those who are ingrained in the subject and issue, as a part of both my own research and artistic process. And in this case, it was working with those who were connected with the forest, even if they didn't necessarily consider themselves as activists. And it really helped develop my process and my intention with my work, as I did really want to convey an element of how this type of local activism, grassroots organizing, and community engagement is really needed in the ultimate fight for environmental rights. For example, in my piece, Know Your Neighbors, one community member that I met with stated, the sustainability isn't just about what you think about solar rooftops and gathering your water. It's about knowing your neighbors. As I mentioned earlier, the text components that you see in all of the works are excerpts from interviews with the community members that I worked with. And overall, there was an array of emotions from these interviews: sad, defeated, hopeful, encouraged, wishful. But I wanted to include all of these earnest, honest thoughts into my images. For example, another community member I had spoken with on a few occasions who hopefully but longingly spoke on the importance of Split Oak and our natural spaces when she said, it provides this connection with the natural world that I think we should be cultivating in our cities and suburbs, as you can see here. Additionally, many of the images contain this type of underexposed, dark, almost kind of ominous and haunting, yet beautiful quality to them to also visually represent the existing and persisting threats to both the preservation and existence of the natural world. I think the type of triumph that Split Oak had is very hopeful, but I do want to make viewers consistently aware of the ever increasing threats. For example, as you can see here, even with how close to the edge they're pushing the development of the houses bordering Split Oak. Ultimately, I want people to see this because although it is a beautiful place right now, there are so many others that aren't being showcased, and also so many factors behind the scenes just fighting to keep it this way. I want people to really recognize the power of local politics and involvement too. Larger issues have always started out from these smaller forms of engagement, and it's these communities that I think are really the most aware and in touch with their own needs and issues. Local grassroots citizen activism and participation can truly be the key to addressing environmental issues as they continue to overwhelm the natural world. And I think education through art is definitely a start to this too. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Renee Sang. I just wanted to say good afternoon to everyone who is here today, and happy Fox Day to those of you who are part of that. And thank you all for just attending and listening to me speak about the artwork that I've worked on. So feel free to pop any questions into the chat and I can address them as well.
Thanks, Renee. I think maybe you all can hear me. This is Professor Rowe hiding in the background so we can see Renee and Renee's wonderful work. So I'm going to field some of the questions that are coming into the chat for you, if that's okay. One of the questions is a great one. How did talking to people involved in the project change your initial vision and the individual works themselves?
Yeah, so I would say that was probably the element that informed my work the most. It's one thing to be presenting an issue that I am, kind of introduced to for the first time, but the most important part to me was kind of showcasing the people behind the fight and the activism to save this forest. So I really wanted to convey a sense of that, I guess, relationship building, but I did also want
if you can kind of talk about, again, how talking to the people changed your initial vision and the works themselves, and maybe tie that into what aspects were the most challenging for you.
Sure, yeah. So I think the questions do relate a bit. So I was kind of discussing, I guess, one of the challenges to working on this project, right? So for those of you who aren't aware, as I kind of mentioned in the video, Split Oak Forest is a conservation land, and most of it's in Orange County, part of it is in Osceola County, that was recently threatened by the Central Florida Expressway trying to build a road through the forest, basically. And, they actually got the issue onto the past, most recent November election, and it ended up winning its amendment on the ballot, which was very exciting. So I think one of the challenges for me, because this is, a year-long project, I was a bit nervous that some of the, I guess, momentum that had been building up to the election would die down a bit after Split Oak's, monumental win on the ballot. It was over 86.4% of people voted in favor of saving it, basically. But, I did want to make people aware that this was only a temporary kind of roadblock, I guess, to the road project that was going to be built through Split Oak. So it actually helped because it helped transition my work from just being kind of an environmental piece to being a piece about community and just local organizing, local engagement, and activism as well. So, in the kind of, I guess, second stage or second direction of my work, I ended up still taking photos at Split Oak, of course, but also incorporating the people who were behind saving it in this fight. So in that way, it was a challenge at first to kind of change directions, but it ended up being a strength, I think, because I did want to convey that how important the community was in this issue.
Thanks, Renee. That's so good to hear. I think we have time for one more question, and that is from Professor Audrey Hope here in the department, and it really connects to the work itself and the form that it ended up taking. And she asks, how did your photographer's eye develop throughout this project? I would love to hear you talk about that.
Yeah, so, I would say, as I mentioned, I feel like I've always been kind of a photographer. I enjoyed photography at a young age, and, I had kind of dropped it a bit in high school and really wanted to pick it back up in college. And I would say I've definitely developed more strength in my conceptual skills as it relates to photography. So, it's not only about taking a photo of a beautiful landscape or a beautiful scene in Split Oak. Like, it's true, like landscapes and beautiful views can, I think, move us, but I did want to go beyond that a bit and convey kind of more undertones of darkness or sadness or potential hints of destruction that could threaten this forest. So I would say, I've developed my photographer's eye by being more able to translate these conceptual ideas into my artwork. So as you can see, some of the images, or most of the images, are a bit more underexposed and darker in quality, because I didn't want it to just be a beautiful landscape. I did want to convey, like I said, that other element of its potential threatening and potential destruction, so that can also move people.
Thanks so much, Renee. Your work is just beautiful and it looks fantastic next door, and I hope lots of people go over and see it. And I think we'll close this segment now and we'll go on to Andrea, if that's okay.
Sounds good.
All right, thanks, Renee.
Everyone, my name is Andrea Czafit and I'm here to present my senior capstone project. It's a year-long project that's finally up in the museum. I want to take a moment to thank all the museum staff and all the professors that helped support us throughout this process. The works look great within the Cornell Fine Arts Museum, and really couldn't have done it without the guidance and assistance from all the faculty here at Rollins. Today I'm going to be discussing two of my works, The Old, the Here and Now, a newspaper takeaway, and at this point it is procedural, a separate composition that is placed on the wall adjacent to those newspapers. These two works discuss the relationship between government and capitalism that work as joint systems to disenfranchise the working class, and how this relationship has withstood over time in the form of city planning and media coverage of those disenfranchised. I use Sanford, Florida, my native and current home city, as the subject of my work and exemplar of these concepts. Because Sanford is the only city I've truly known, I notice that a lot of the spaces have remained the same over time, despite the advocacies for social justice and changes in wealth distribution that have taken place in the past decade. The difficulties for minorities and lower-income city residents have remained the same. My work is inspired by the microaggressive comments I heard about low-income locals and their neighborhoods while growing up in public school. I think that many of us in the U.S. are familiar with the prejudices exhibited by peers and adults growing up, even in more liberal areas. I believe that an ignorance to history is one of the biggest components that instates prejudice. I wanted to make a body of work that described how Sanford became divided in this way from its foundations to now. The beginnings of this process involved going through multiple archives, such as UCF's, the Sanford Museum, and the Rollins Archive. Much of my sources came from the Sanford Herald newspapers, which began production towards the start of Sanford's founding in 1908. I pulled from those newspaper publishings and other sources, making a variety of selections from World War II, the Great Depression, the Civil Rights Movement, and other eras that influenced today's racial class divide. As I came across new findings, I created collage-like compositions of these clippings from Sanford's founding to the more contemporary times of the 2000s. Through a combination of my research and personal experience, I realized conceptions of people and place are connected. My work combines both features with the overlay of words and images. One of the first compositions I made was my work, At This Point It Is Procedural, in which I accumulated police logs and other writings on arrest and police officers. While finding these materials, I noticed patterns in events, certain repetitions of biased language, and a mix of sensationalizing and phlegmatic descriptors that contributed to the dehumanization of disenfranchised peoples. I started revealing this by circling and underlying words within At This Point It Is Procedural, and grew the body of work into different compositions that addressed Sanford's foundational industries that played huge roles in creating economic disadvantages and limiting spatial function. These compositions became the different curated pages of The Old, the Here and Now, which went through multiple iterations in order to best connect these histories and their living remnants. The markings within these compositions highlight actors, verbs, sensationalist topics and language, or the dry way in which police logs and certain news articles describe the situation of marginalized workers and citizens. I kept working with newspapers as material because they are both ephemeral and personal. As I communicated with others to educate them on my findings and to learn more about Sanford's history, I met people who kept newspapers on personally significant dates and events. And in my research to find a newsprint service, I found that others created family editions of newspapers for weddings. Beyond this individualistic aspect, I think newspapers have the public perception as authoritative presenters of truth. I wanted to use the authority of media and aestheticize it for revealing bias around people and events within articles instead of presenting people with bias as journalists have done. The old, the here and now demonstrate further oppressions by systemic, institutional practices such as gentrification and Sanford's infrastructure that was largely built on exploitation. For these pages, I selected images of resources and facilities that many residents could probably recognize, some obvious but some that might have seemed benign and therefore ignored. With these places being so general, I hope to have the audience consider some spaces within their own cities and contemplate their histories and economic social structure. For example, an integral part of Sanford's history is the early Florida banker and representative Forrest Lake that incorporated the black community of Goldsboro into Seminole County and later annexed Goldsboro to become Sanford. One of his early business failures, the Forrest Lake Hotel, is shown in the composition above, which is a representation of a sort of origins for the city planners and politicians to address the interests of tourists and downtown visitors over that of the residents in this area. Another entrepreneur politician, Henry B. Plant, ran the project for creating the railroad system running from East and West Streets that was built by African American debitors and other minorities for commercial interest. Within the articles, those who have worked within the construction are rarely described as workers, and writers focus on the project or financial benefits of the railroad system. I found that other industries, like the largely popular cigar production prior to the Great Depression, were largely exploiting undervalued minority work. Articles that represented these similar industries referred to workers in vagueness while reporting wealth successes of the industry and not the people. Throughout the newspapers, I circled language to gain focus on this vagueness within specific phrases. I decided to separate at this point it is procedural from the newspaper composition, the old, the here and now, because it was important for me to give the topic of institutionalization its own presence and separate recognition. It was also important for me to discuss the industries that specifically function to hinder minorities, like agriculture, cigar production, tourism, real estate, and other foundational productions, as a particular type of city shaper that are regarded as the past and therefore disregarded. Throughout the page compositions, I tried to meld the articles to the building structure, as though the articles came physically forward like the structures presented. The way in which city planning is designed and the way in which articles are written are equally intentional, creating a system that cyclically influences the other. Generally, I think the public assumes that the past is the past and that prior oppressive systems are gone, but these systems have managed to transform oppressive methods in subversive ways. It's important to look back and see how people have been hurt and exploited in the past so that we can recognize how disadvantaging continues and create answers on how to combat oppressions. The choice of print-on-demand newspapers was to make handouts that are easily accessible and shared. I want my work to revitalize the public conscience to not just histories, but recurring histories that continue to be as real as they have been. I'd like to again thank everyone who has been supporting me throughout the creation of this work, and to encourage those who have a chance to see the show in person to pick up a newspaper takeaway and to think more deeply of infrastructural history, and to continue to ask questions about the spaces we live in and who they are best designed for.
Hi everyone, thank you for watching that, by the way.
Sorry, it gives me a little countdown to wait to go live. So yeah, thanks, Andrea. Let's have some questions for you. I wonder, I mean, it's so great to hear you talk in great detail about all of the extensive research that went into the project and was so vital to the project. I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about, because it was really important to you to be mindful of the stories and the narratives that you were drawing from, and how you sort of grappled with that in terms of how you chose to, appropriate archival material in your work.
Hi, yeah. So for me, again, I'm sort of drawing on my personal experiences from hearing microaggressive comments in public school. And then as I continued my research, I found more specifically why these people are in situations. And then of course, I also visited the spaces and I photographed them as a part of a separate project. And those communications also influenced the way I viewed the space, because essentially with the experience of the locals, there's a lot that has been taken away in a lot of ways in which they're excluded from the public spaces in terms of like their income and like what is, I guess, like um, accessible to them. So within the newspapers, I chose locations that also kind of experience this like exclusivity of the locals.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear a bit more about that, Andrea. And there's a question from Professor Simmons who's wondering what you might create next in your practice.
Especially like as COVID dies down, I really want to just continue communicating with other people and especially create more personal works, probably sharing like these people's stories that I've talked to, and also try to connect with some of the residents that have more historical ties there. Because say in within West and East Streets of downtown Sanford, there's a lot of residents there that have had homes there for generations. So yeah, I really want to like share their experiences.
I'm excited to see what you do next, of course. One of the things we always talk about in this program is, a year project is a year project, but these are things that can go on for many, many years. And I'm excited to see where you sort of extend this type of practice. And that sort of relates to a comment from Dr. Heller, CFAM director, Dr. Heller, who says, thank you for your appreciation of history and highlighting how art can and should, to make it accessible. Sorry, I'm butchering. But I wonder if you can kind of speak to that, because I mean, you talk about the importance of the takeaway. Maybe talk a little bit about how you came to decide on that was going to be a key form that you were using, this thing that you were allowing anyone visiting to take away pieces of this history as you've contextualized it in this newspaper.
Yeah, so it just felt more fitting to essentially like use the articles and kind of reassign them for my own purpose. I think I mentioned in the artist talk that I wanted to uh, present the articles that have bias instead of presenting like the people have been discussed with bias as presented within those articles. So for me, I think it's really important to sort of retransform that purpose in that language for, I guess, like a greater good.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of following that, Dr. Heller also noted it's interesting how both you and Renee, right, both include community and their participation in your practices. And do you see this community participation as a constant component?
I think so, because I mean, really, if you think about it, the work is about community where I'm discussing like a lot of these resources that, in general, people have used, like, say, the park within Lake Monroe is used by both the locals and downtown visitors. That's like one of the spaces that's shared. Um, but again, there's also like these spaces that seem to be sort of like culturally limited in a way.
Yeah, good points. And also, Rachel Simmons, of course, wants one of the papers for the Rollins Book Arts collection, so she will go take one of the takeaways. That's excellent.
Thank you, Rachel.
On that note, sort of in relation to the takeaways again, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you sort of dealt with that as production, in terms of you had to outsource this to a printer to create these copies. It wasn't something that could be done in-house because of the mass-produced nature of it. How did that, talk a little bit about that in terms of how you negotiated that and how that impacted the form that the work took?
Yeah. So especially like took some time in consideration to consider how I wanted the newspapers done. Because of course there's the option of doing kind of the more modern newspaper with like bleach white paper and like tabloid size that's like 11 by 17. I decided for my final form to go with a broadsheet newspaper size that is 11 by 22 to kind of tap into like those I guess traditional aesthetics of the newspaper that again we tribute to like authority and the way we traditionally expect like news to be delivered like within that time.
Well, and I know it was a bit of an ordeal having to work with printing deadlines and things of that nature.
Oh
as
yeah,
well.
especially.
And yeah, and Dr. Prosser also would like take away for the archives in addition to the book arts collection, if the two are possible. And Andrea, do you want to speak to sort of it's sort of an addition, right? You created an edition of these, and are they available until they're gone? How are you envisioning that aspect of the takeaway?
So of course, because of the limiting like printing resources, there's currently 250 overall within the edition. I was advised that that would be enough for people to come and take some because, of course, visiting has also been limited with COVID. Another thing is that I really want my work, again, to be distributed and viewed. So I'm open to people contacting me for distribution. So that contact information should be available at the front desk of the museum.
Yeah, that's great, and a good, important point to bring up at the end here. So I think that we're going to go ahead and move on to the final arts talk for today, if that's okay. Thank you, Andrea.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions.
All right, so we'll move on to the last talk of the day, which is Melissa Rodriguez.
Hello everyone, I am Melissa Rodriguez, a senior here at Rollins College presenting my senior capstone project, and I would like to take the time to properly thank the Cornell Fine Arts Museum staff, Gisela, Dawn Rowe, my close friends Valerie, Melanie, and Keziah who are included within the works, and everyone who has helped me along the way to have my work officially shown in a professional art space. Today I will be talking to you all about both my works, Are We Enough Yet? And The Blueprint. Here are some shots of the work installed for those who won't get the chance to come see it in person. All of our works look so great, and I'm very excited to present my work to all of you today. Speaking of my work, my practice has evolved over the time of my whole senior capstone experience. My main mediums used here are photography and digital media manipulation. My work explores and questions identity, and most specifically cultural identity, and how the media has influenced my own perception of what it means to be a Latina. Photography has always been a medium of mine that I was attracted to at an early age. I remember my stepdad giving me my first digital camera that he got from his job when I was about 12 years old. I would always continue to use photography as a way to explore and understand the world. I was always really attracted to color theory, advertisements, and design, so I knew I needed to create something that could combine my favorite interests for this project. Looking back at it now, throughout the whole process, I kind of figured out the reason why I was obsessed with understanding my Latin identity, and it really stemmed from never feeling like I belonged 100% to American or Colombian culture because I somehow was in the middle of both worlds. And it was hard for people to put me in the box of the stereotyped Latina that they would always see in movies because I was very Americanized. But also, I was not 100% accepted into American culture because of my physical appearance. I was always othered. This thought process mixed with analyzation of the media's representations of Latinas would be my starting point for this whole experience, and it was very self-reflective. And in the next slide, I will be sharing the research I did that would inform me of what actual representations were being made of Latin people. This information did not necessarily influence all the imagery of my work, but it did lead me to the posters and characters I would use as inspiration. So in the beginning, I found a lot of articles and research papers that presented information showing how much of a lack of representation there actually was for Latin characters within the film industry. Here, I would like to show you guys a statistic that shows how between 2007 and 2018, only 4.5% of the overall characters were Latino, and according to the US Census, by 2019, the Latinx population had already reached 18%. With the little representation that is given to Latinx characters, they are usually placed into stereotypes that Western media has created for Latin people. I looked into the typical stereotypes of the spicy Latina, the Latin lover, the common one-dimensional typecasts of criminals, maids, gardeners, or exotic hypersexual characters. And while I did all my research, it made me question what Latin characters did I see while growing up, and did they influence my own self-perception and my perception of other Latin people? But most importantly, it made me aware of how the Western gaze worked with stereotypes. After conducting my initial research that informed me of these misrepresentations of Latinx people, I had to grapple with what forms of entertainment did I want to use as visual material for my work, and how can I use it to critique the representations themselves. Ultimately, I decided to look at advertisements, food logos, and even some aspects of cartoon characters. The advertisements I found revealed to me that these stereotypes and representations have been around for a while. For example, I found this Coca-Cola advertisement that was made in the 1950s, and I started to notice common aspects that Latinas would have, like flowers in the hair. I also found these illustrations made by a man named Dean Cornwell for Chiquita Bananas. He was a famous American illustrator and muralist working in the 1920s through the 1950s. These illustrations greatly influenced how I would style my subjects and some of the visual imagery in my work. For example, the flower in the hair, red lipstick, the ruffled tops, and exotic tropical plants. I even found this advertisement that was made in the early 2000s carrying the same aspects as the previous ads I shown. The logos I decided to look at was the Chiquita Banana Woman and the logo for pan, which is a corn flour that is used to make arepas and is commonly used here in the States. I specifically looked at these two logos because these were things I would eat at home, and once I started to see how Latinas were portrayed in advertisements, I noticed these two logos and immediately recognized something similar was happening here too. Eventually, I would end up using these logos within my work, The Blueprint, because they both deal with the stereotypes of exoticism, red lipstick, and hoop earrings. I really thought it was interesting as well that we see stereotypical imagery like this every day in the items that we consume. Lastly, I did research on cartoon characters of Latinas that were present when I was growing up because these were the earliest forms of representation I remember being exposed to. I looked at cartoon characters that I watched as a kid like Dora the Explorer and The Proud Family, but I also looked at cartoons that are being made today. The cartoon that really kind of influenced the direction of my work and solidified what I was concerned about was Princess Elena from the Disney franchise. This princess is the first Disney Latina princess, and when the creators of her character were asked about what part of Latin America she was from, they said she was just a pan-Latina character that was representing all of Latin America. I realized this was very problematic because not all Latin countries are the same. I then realized this is what was happening to a majority of Latina icons in logos and cartoon characters, and that is why they were all looking the same to me. So I took the common physical aspects of these characters, such as brown hair, tan skin, flowers in their hair, and association to the color red, and I used it in my art to both acknowledge and counter these stereotypes. My work asks a lot of questions, and it's probably because this is all a way for me to investigate what is actually happening with the representation of Latinas. Why is a Latina character on a cartoon show described as beautiful and treacherous? Why are so many Latinas wearing the color red, and who is creating these stereotypes? Why are Latinas in film deeply connected to hypersexual and feminine traits? And if I identify with any of these stereotypes, am I enforcing them? Or is it something Latinas can wear without being called spicy? Proper representation in general can be a complicated topic, but my art asks these and many other questions regarding the choices being made about these characters because at the end of the day, they influence Latina self-perception and how others perceive Latinas. These pieces are very personal and special to me, not only because they include me and my friends, but also because it has made a space for me to open up a dialogue for other Latin people and non-Latin people to question what media they are consuming. Throughout this whole process, I've come to understand that starting these dialogues are very important because they lead to extensive conversations with other people that might not question the stereotypes they are seeing everywhere. Because of all this extensive research and creating my art, I had very meaningful conversations with my friends regarding what it means to be Latina to each individual, and then questioning what images come to mind when we are talking about Latinaness. It will probably be something I will always bring up in conversation now, but I'm glad to be someone to start it. I'd like to thank again everyone who helped me along the way in creating this work, and thank you everyone for your time tonight.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone's having a really great Fox Day. I'm here, and yeah, I can't wait to answer some of your guys' questions.
Well, awesome. Thanks, Melissa. That was so great to hear you just bring all that together. There's some wonderful feedback in the comments as well, just also echoing how fascinating that research is, and the use and the transformation of the logos sending this really powerful message. And Rachel Simmons has a great question that I'm also curious to hear a little bit more about. She's asking, how has your work been received by your friends and peers?
Yeah, so everyone has told me that they love it and that they think it was just really well done, especially with like the stickers that I made. And kind of like I think I even had a conversation with Rachel that it looks like a flag, and like little things, like little details that they point out that I was just like, well, I mean, like I didn't necessarily like had that in mind, but I guess it plays out the way that they saw it as well. So it was really cool, like hearing them talk about it, and even like family members who were just kind of like, oh, like having that conversation as well, like what does it mean to be Latina, and how are we portrayed, and how it influences like what we do today, basically. Like I remember I had an aunt tell me that the like we have to be aware of how we are presented because of how we're presented in media. And I was just like, yeah, like that's a good um, point to be made. So it's opened more conversations, if anything. I feel like that's how it was received. A lot of people made more like ideas and comments that I'm like, yeah, like that's on top of this. And I think it's because it's such a broad topic, but like very specific as well.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a question about the formal aspects of the work in relation to the content that you chose to include in the backgrounds. Dr. Heller's asking if you can talk about the pattern backgrounds of the portraits and where those originate from.
Yeah, so the patterns of the background, I mean, like it's an actual fan that I scanned in. It's funny because I got that fan from Colombia when I was there like a couple summers ago. And I really wanted to have kind of like a textured background, but one that also kind of brings this like life to the posters. And I feel like a lot of movies and like film, it glamorizes a lot of things. And I felt like the fan gave it that kind of glamour without it being like glitter or something like that. Like glamour without like the glitz and glam, if that makes sense. But the fans themselves, I actually had to edit them. So like for example, the yellow one with the circles, those were actually on the fan itself. But then like I had to go in Photoshop and switch out the designs, like the circles, and I would change the color of the fan and stuff like that. So that's kind of how it came to be.
Thanks, Melissa. Sorry, I was just realizing we're getting a little low signal, but I think we're back. There's a great question from Jeremy Perez, who is wondering if there are any artists that helped inspire your work and how you presented it, because I think that's particular too. How you presented the work is significant.
Yeah, so I looked a lot at Carrie Mae Weems and Lorna Simpson. Mainly with Carrie Mae Weems, she kind of had like a lot of her work questions power structures and like how they influence herself. So for sure, I think the direction that I went with self-perception and like representation and kind of that power structure of film. That's where she inspired me. And then with Lorna Simpson, she did a lot of photography and like sequential, I don't really sequential, but I guess like multiples of work. So her presentation was kind of what influenced the presentation of my work, where I wanted it to be sequential with the three triads of me, but also like multiples with the blueprint as well. So that's how she inspired me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I remember talking about that. I want to go into, I'm going to double up 2 questions here and then come back to another question from Donna Hargrove. And I think that will be a good closer. But so Dr. Prosser and Gisela Carbonell are asking, tell us what you hope both Latinas and non-Latinas will take away from this work. And I think you can kind of connect this to Gisela's question about now that the works are on view, how has this project changed the way you perceive Latina characters and movies and advertisements? So, you know, what do you hope Latinas and non-Latinas will take away, and how has your sort of perception also maybe shifted?
Yeah, so with Latinas and non-Latinas, honestly, I just really want them to be aware of the actual characters themselves and kind of start to notice the same patterns that I noticed, and the very like stereotypical ones, of course. And just to start questioning them, like who's making them, who's creating these characters, and like why are they being presented the way they are, and also acknowledge to the actual like good representations that there are for Latinas. Like for example, if anyone has seen Jane the Virgin, that was probably the first one that I saw was actual proper representation for a Latina American. Pretty sure she was a Venezuelan American. So I just want them to kind of take away the, like acknowledge, but also understand that this needs to be questioned and maybe even dismantled and changed. And what was the second question? Oh yeah, how has it changed my views of Latinas? I mean, if anything, it's empowered me to be a lot more confident and like not really care if I do wear hoops and red lipstick, and I'm like reclaiming them, even though they're these stereotypes that were used against Latinas. I feel like it's gotten to a point where I just reclaim them and wear them, even if they are markers that are commonly associated to Latinas. And if anything, it just also makes me want other Latinas to reclaim them as well and to start using their voice and having more Latinas in the film industry as well. Because once Latinas themselves are in there, they get to make the characters themselves and actually make them accurate.
Awesome. Well, and Dr. Carbonell's comment about Latina characters in movies and advertisements kind of connects also with Professor Hargrove's question in terms of, are you planning to continue along this line of working in relation to these notions of media representations, or do you see this branching out into new subject areas?
It's really hard because I feel like it works so well that I want to continue, but I also like want to experiment in different formats as well. I mean, I've been taking an artist book class this semester, and I was thinking about it, and I feel like since this can be like such an intimate thing with like cultural identity, I feel like it'd be kind of cool if I consider like an artist book that like talks about other like topics of segues of Latinas and representation. I don't think I'll steer far away from it pretty soon. I want to continue talking about it, and I want to bring awareness to it and like dismantle it at the same time. So yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would answer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole world and a whole life ahead of you. So awesome. Well, thank you so much, Melissa. I think we're going to go ahead and bring it to a close. We've come right up to the end of our time now. And I want to thank everyone for coming. I guess we're just going to end this by, or I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe I'm going to be seen. I'm seen. All right. I want to thank everyone for coming, and for the students for, you know, taking their work so seriously and producing such an amazing exhibition this year. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, all of CFAM. Enjoy your Fox Day.